It basically reminds us that we live moment to moment. We don't live in the future. But for that moment, they are together. And that's how it ends. Whatever else happens tomorrow, that's another day. And we don't go there. The narrative doesn't privilege that.
Welcome to Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies. Each episode, we speak to a brilliant screenwriter who's kindly dug out their initial screenplay for what became a beloved movie, discussing what changed, what didn't, and why, from first draft to the big screen. It's almost Christmas, so this week we're chatting to the writer of a modern festive classic. Phyllis Nagy fought for decades to make Carol, her heart-wrenching tale of forbidden love between two women set in the 1950s. This incredibly moving 2015 romantic drama, directed by Todd Haynes, introduced us to Therese, an aspiring photographer played by Rooney Mara, who's working a temp job in a department store when she meets Carol, a glamorous older woman played by Cate Blanchett, who turns her world upside down. The film had this snowy December backdrop that accentuated the emotion of Carol and Therese's longing to be together in a society that won't allow it. Phyllis adapted the story from an acclaimed 1952 novel by her friend Patricia Highsmith. Adapting The Price of Salt, as the novel was originally titled, involved overcoming several hurdles though. As she struggled to bring Carol to the screen, Phyllis found herself battling to be heard in a film industry that was, and arguably still is, reluctant to give a proper voice to LGBTQ+ stories. It may have taken 18 years, but it was a battle that Phyllis ultimately won. Since its release in 2015, Carol has become a cult festive favourite, celebrated anew every December. Here's what Phyllis had to say about her belief in the story that kept her fighting. We also talked about the film's legacy today, the subtle details that you might not notice decorating Carol and Therese's romance, and fans clamouring for a sequel that Phyllis insists is not coming. We also got round to an important question, or at least a question that I've wondered about ever since I saw the film for the first time. Did Carol leave those gloves behind on purpose, the gloves that spark her and Therese's entire romance? Phyllis's answer was intriguing. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demecq. Phyllis, thanks so much for joining us. There are Labours of Love, then there's Carol, a film that you fought for 20 years to get to the screen, honouring an extraordinary writer who you shared a friendship with, Patricia Highsmith. So 5 years on, how do you reflect back on this movie now and the struggle that you underwent to get it made? Can it be put into words?
Well, I mean, there are two ways to look at it. One is that I'm getting older and I just don't remember what the struggle was early on. I mean, it didn't feel like a struggle at the time. And as the years went on, it felt like an impossibility. So that's a different feeling. That's a feeling of resignation to one's fate. And there was a moment, indeed, where the original producer lost the rights to the novel, where I thought, oh, well, that's that, as Carol says. I started becoming, sort of odd versions of the character in the script. That's over. And it was for, I don't know, quite a while. I seem to remember a year and a half passing by before the specter of it arose again in the form of Liz Carlson, with whom I'd worked before. Mm. And even then I didn't want to go back to what I imagined would be another torturous process of, oh yeah, let's have the same questions, the same reservations, the same, we'll never get a woman to do this, blah, blah, blah. But of course the world had changed in that time, thankfully. And it really wasn't that difficult once Liz convinced the estate to give her the rights. And once she convinced me, indeed, to actually allow my script to be used, because I was just tired of it,
Yeah, it sounds like you had all sorts of setbacks that were kind of informed by, disappointingly and somewhat ironically, a lot of the attitudes that we see in the movie. So from what I've researched, it wasn't just homophobia that you were encountering in trying to get this film made. You know, people sort of like not wanting to fund the film over fears of a gay love story, but also plain old misogyny. There were question marks over a film starring 2 female leads. Shock horror. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I think that was it. I mean, one of the lucky things that happened with this film was that it was developed in the UK, and we had a real champion in Tessa Ross who remained with it throughout most of that time. And it was about women in various ways. It was about a woman who leaves her child, 2 women fronting a film. Was anyone a big enough movie star to do that? The whole experience, seeing the changes, becoming a bit like a prisoner to the project in the best possible way.
Yeah.
That's new people coming and having to go over it again and again and again. No, it's not about people who regret being gay or who fret about it, or you know, I used to take to asking people what I'm sure was a rude question, but there comes a point when you don't care. I would say to certain people, do you wake up in the morning regretting being heterosexual? Do you think about it at all? Or do you think about other things, like you regret being a bad person, or, you know, things that you can control in some interesting way? That was the major stumbling block with people. And it really wasn't about them being gay. It was about them in some way, obviously having to suffer for it in some way, or because to be fair, we'd had a tradition of films that were quite successful that hewed to that formula, more or less. I can think of precious few here anyway that did not end sort of badly. Even Brokeback Mountain ends badly, at least for one of those guys. In Britain, of course, has a much more, I don't know if you'd call it healthy tradition, but at least you had, you have My Beautiful Laundrette and what else? Beautiful Thing, I guess, and various examples in cinema. Billy Elliot, perhaps, of a rather more healthy approach to this. And perhaps there was nothing with women, but still, we, thank God, everyone who was producing this felt that way.
Yeah.
Because it could have, someone could have come along with a lot of money and said, we want to do this, but you have to have a couple of scenes of Carol weeping and questioning her sexuality. And then I would have been gone. It would have been a completely different, probably some guy would have come in and rewritten the script. That in that way, I suppose it was an epic, agonizing thing, but it didn't feel like that, except when you look back at a certain point, at a certain year and thought, geez, it's been all these years. And this means this is not going to happen.
It certainly has been a few years now, and in which time the film has just amassed this passionate audience. It must be surreal for you not only to have won that battle in getting it made, but for this movie to be now out there and to command such a following. So every Christmas there's renewed celebration for Carol by legions of fans who have such a strong emotional connection to the material. How moving is that for you every December? It's very humbling, I suppose. I knew, even whilst the whole awards season of it all was going on, that it would outlive that, and that that would become a footnote. The fact that Carol, whatever it was, wasn't nominated for Best Picture Oscar. Lots of things haven't been. And it was not going to matter, although it was quite moving to see the amount of
objection, I suppose, to that fact from its ardent supporters. But over time, that's become less angry and more, we just love this movie, which is, is just better for all involved. I try very hard to engage with that level of, what would you call it, fandom for the film. And so I do this delicate dance between, okay, I've lived with this for a long time, too long, more than like half my life. It's time for you to live with it. I'm on to other things. There's more to life than Carol. And yet there isn't. This is what it is. There seems to be quite a clamoring for a sequel, but as I try to delicately point out, there is no sequel. You don't want to see the sequel. You don't want to know what happens in the 60s and the 70s, God knows, to those people. And there's no other book. I mean, that's the book. That's it. Yeah. She's not going to resurrect and write a sequel, and neither am I, actually.
Carol 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Carol 2. There's a fascinating move to have an Abby Carol movie, which makes a little more sense, but still, that's not the narrative. Carol didn't end up with Abby. That's another sad ending. So we don't. I don't want to go there. That's for sure.
It's interesting for me as a fan. It used to be that I knew it was Christmas when I saw the Coca-Cola ad on the TV. Now I know it's Christmas because my Twitter timeline is suddenly full of stills from Carol and quotes from Carol. So people do absolutely love this film, and rightly so. What do you put it down to? I mean, you spent so long with your head in this world, in with these characters. Did you manage to kind of work out in that time what it is about this story that's so special? What do you think it is about Carol that's left such a mark?
Well, for one thing, I think the film is very good. I mean, it's a really beautiful, well-made film that doesn't pander to sentimental expectations, but which is still, very moving. I know I'm biased, but I do find it to be very moving and quite, gosh, I don't like the word uplift, but it's got something. I think
it's appropriate, yeah.
Right? Yeah. All those terrible words, uplifting, relatable, etc., which I never use, but they can all be applied, I suppose, to that. So there's that. I mean, it could have been a horrible film. I imagine a version of this that would not have been well made, which would have featured a lot of hand-wringing and weeping and, guilt. There are ways to portray guilt without having speeches about it. But also, the other part of that is because both the film and the script and the actors involved resist a false notion of sentimentality, that there is a way in which this mirrors real life, or real life emotion, I should say, even in its stylized renderings of a bygone era. It's the past that allows the present to be so moving with that film. And it is completely of its moment, the narrative. It doesn't seek to connect 1952 or 1953 to now or to 2015. It's the same in significant ways. And in some not so, it's not the same in significant ways. But insofar as those emotions and what's going on and what's at stake, it's still the same, which you can find depressing, but there are lots of things that are still the same that don't have anything to do with LGBTQ rights or, child custody. It's just a human condition that we never ever seem to learn or lessons. And that's good because artists would have nothing to write about or make films about. There's nothing especially exciting about happy stories. happy in that sense of Disney-fied.
Was that one of the things that kept you fighting? Because I mean, a lot of people over the course of 20 years, they would have thrown the towel in or decided the time has passed, but you stuck at it. You kept fighting for this project. Was that partly down to the scarcity of stories like this, the need for stories like this? Was it down to, I guess it might have also been down to your friendship with Patricia. So you guys were actually close in real life, right? And she had died a year before you came onto the project. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, my reasons were entirely selfish, I suppose. Yes, I felt a responsibility to the book and to the memory of Pat. But also, I just didn't want anyone else to get their hands on it. This is a business in which people are constantly rewritten, and many times for no good reason. I see scripts all the time that people say, gee, we think this needs another pass. And I look at it and I think, no, it doesn't. But this is the game. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want that to happen. And I was very naive, of course, because it could have happened at any time. But it didn't. So everything seemed to eventually feel bizarrely fated, just like that meeting between Carol and Therese, and what happens to them seems oddly fated as well. Sometimes the stars just align, I suppose, and it takes them sometimes 20 years. But there you go.
So at what point in your life and your career, when you began writing Carol, were you still in London at the time? Because you were at the Royal Court Theatre. Yeah.
I was in London until 2007 or 8, when I decided it was time to come here full time. I was really interested in film, always, but I knew that however I entered into that strange and sharky sometimes business, that it had to be with a project that I really loved, I really wanted to do. And I'd been quite fine in the theater. And I knew also that eventually the films would come to me. Somebody would come to me, that I wouldn't have to go out there and say, hey, take me. So I just waited. And this opportunity presented itself probably a year and a bit. I think it was towards the end of 1996 when the producer approached Mel Kenyon, my agent at Casarato, to say, hey, I have the rights to this book, and do you have anyone who might be able to do this? And it was one of the few books of hers that I hadn't read, because she had a lot of opinions about her own work. And that was not one of the books that she recommended I read, that I go out of my way to read. She did give me an edition of it when it was republished. She changed the title to Carol when Bloomsbury republished it. And she gave me a book, and I said, oh, great, I'll read it. And she said, no, not now. Read, Deepwater or Edith's Diary or one of those. And so I knew that she was ambivalent about it. So I didn't want to read it and then have to say, gee, I don't like it, or you're wrong, I love it. And I read it, and I knew that it was important to take it on, because the book also resists easy psychologizing. And I think it was one of the reasons the book sold as well as it did back in the 50s. Pat often spoke about getting letters from people saying, this book changed my life, etc. So it's both the book and the film that have that quality about them, which ultimately is the real underlying reason it's so enduring. Its narrative is so enduring. I got those letters too, very moving, from women in their 90s, 80s, who had a very similar story to Carol or Therese. And reading the stories of their relationships and what they went through and how they got through these things is very moving. Mm. And I think Pat, as much as she was not interested in other people in a funny way, would have been also moved, I hope, by the response anew to her novel and to the film. I don't know what she would have thought of the film.
Hey everyone, this is Al, just jumping in to tell you that support for Script Apart this week comes from Cave Day. Revising scripts requires supreme focus. The best writers know they need to harness everything they've got to overcome internal and external obstacles. Cave Day lead group focus sessions for a worldwide community every day on Zoom that help you do just that. Think of it like a group fitness class, but for your work. A trained guide leads check-ins, deep work sprints, and energizing breaks. Members report they get 2 to 4 times more done with Cave Day's science-backed method. Join the world's most focused community and work alongside Emmy winners and Oscar winners. Gift cards are available and make a great present as we head towards the festive season, and Script Apart listeners can try it out for free. Head to caveday.org and type in the promo code ScriptApart, all uppercase, at checkout. That's caveday.org. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. Patricia's work had been adapted quite a few times into films that have been deemed classics by everyone else, like Strangers on a Train, but for her, she had sort of a few reservations, put it that way.
We had a sort of, not an argument about Strangers on a Train, but I mean, it is a great film. It's not her book.
Yeah.
But, and nor is Purple Noon or any of those attempts at Ripley that she was alive to see. She would have loved Cate Blanchett. That I know, that I'm sure she would have found her quite intriguing in many ways. And I'm sure she would have appreciated the style of it. But who knows what, she was so contrary. I made quite a few significant changes along the way that she might have objected to.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of had to, right? Because Carol, or The Price of Salt, as it was originally published as, it's so intimate, so first person, and I suppose the challenge for you as a dramatist must have been, without lapsing into voiceover, how do you find exterior ways of showing what's going on in these characters' heads?
Yeah,
I mean, how did you approach that task?
With film, you see, if it had been a play or a film that I was just writing for myself, I could have handled that in various ways. But of course, the minute somebody pays for something, you are beholden to them and their vision. And so it's a double, sometimes a triple-edged sword. It wasn't just what I wanted. It's how it could fit into Film 4 commissioned that before Tessa Ross was the head of Film 4. Right. And then the guy who commissioned it left, and the next guy tossed it off his slate. So they didn't actually own it when Tessa came back. And she read the script and got excited. And we had to tell her that Film 4 had owned it, actually. But now she bought it back. And I guess that, she just made sure that it got made eventually. Mm. She was like the patron saint of Carol in many ways. So yeah, I had to take on board the producer, the people who commissioned it, who were men, which is different,
Yes.
You have to sort of explain a few things along the way. Eventually, when there is a draft that pleases them, you then get a director who then, you have to work with them. The whole situation, the whole process over all those years was a huge lesson in diplomacy in in how to keep what's essential to your vision and your style, and what you like to do as a writer, how you keep that intact while also pleasing a million other people along the way.
The draft we're discussing today is fascinating to read, Phyllis, as a fan of the film. The structure of the film is in place, a lot of the beats are the same, or at least very similar, but there are interesting glimpses into places the film could have gone, into themes that you could have lent into more heavily, but opted not to. So we begin at Therese's apartment, New York City, early morning. It's December 1st, pitch black, the barely discernible figure of Therese, asleep on a single bed buried beneath tatty bed covers and makeshift blankets. An alarm clock erupts, shrill and startling. Therese doesn't move a muscle. I wanted to stop just for a moment, Phyllis, and take a second to discuss how this is obviously a film that takes place during the festive period. I'm interested to know, why is Christmas such a powerful and emotive backdrop for the movie? What is it about the holidays that gives you such a good framework for the journey you're about to go on with these characters? What is it about Christmas time that emotionally chimes with some of the feelings that these characters are about to experience?
I remember reading way back when this was starting, a series of articles, like scholarly articles from psychological periodicals, that talks about Christmas and talks about how it is the most stressful and therefore the most dramatic holiday. You often hear, or often, but whenever I have heard about suicides within my community, say, it's very often around Christmas or New Year's. There's a time, it's a time that's either intensely joyful or hopeful or not. There seems to be no middle ground there. And so it's such with Therese and Carol. Carol's going through a divorce, and Therese, she has a job for the holidays, right? She's a temp. And that's a lot of people get those jobs for the holiday. It's a heightened emotional state. Also, she's, being bothered by Richard, let's get engaged or married or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so around the holidays, that becomes increasingly potent because you're dealing with family again around the holidays, which Therese, I quite sympathize with her because she didn't have any around her, and everyone around her does. As someone who's always lived mostly away from home, which is New York, I'm never around family for those holidays. And as I watch friends navigate their parents or siblings and the various emotional traumas that result from those things, I'm simultaneously relieved and also sad about not having those things myself. And so I tried to replicate that somehow in the character of Therese and how she's maneuvering all of this. She's a watcher, isn't she? Mostly.
Which is why she's a photographer as well.
Well, as she was in the book. She was a watch. She is always Pat, basically, an observer. Although in the book she's a would-be stage designer, scenic designer rather than a photographer.
So Therese gets up. Richard is outside the window. You describe him as well bundled in scarves and hat against the cold. He stands striding a bicycle. Richard yells, "You're nuts." Therese takes in a deep breath of cold air and replies, "I love this air. I'm late." A beat passes. She blows him down a kiss. "Hi, you." They then share this kind of fun bike ride in Central Park, giggling as they swerve trees. Therese almost spills her coffee. They fool around with Santa hats. It's a little bit rosier than the relationship between the pair that we see in the film. So obviously we see a version of this in the final film, but in the final film, you decided instead to begin the movie before we go into this with the end almost. So we see Therese and Carol at dinner and the rest of the movie is almost in flashback. Can you tell me about what led to that decision?
That was interesting that, again, when a director comes on board, so in this case, it was Todd, right? There was a director that we waited for before Todd came on board. But we never even had those discussions because he went off to do another film. So who knows what that might have been. But for Todd, he's always interested, or at least he said so at the time, in beginning films on characters who aren't important, who don't show up again. And he had an idea about directors privilege one aspect of a narrative over all others. And in this case, it was the love story, or the obsessive nature of this love story. And he had in mind a model for this, which was Brief Encounter, which begins with a similar, it has a similar framing device, I suppose. He said, well, see if you can figure out how that might work. That's where it came from. But at the same time, which you see in the shooting script, he was also fascinated by the notion of this double flashback structure, which took the party that appears at the end of the film and breaks that up over the course of the movie. So we have the framing device, and then we have these flashbacks and flash forwards to that final party before Therese goes back to the Oak Room. And I suspected immediately that this would not ever work. You do have that discussion, but people have to try what they feel works for them. And in fact, it was the first thing I think that went away in post-production, in the editing room. I think there were several reasons why, but always ultimately it was because it didn't work. It wasn't necessary. Wasn't germane to the story that Todd was privileging.
As these first few pages continue, we start to get a glimpse into Therese's working life at the department store. So in your draft, there's a middle-aged woman who's complaining to Therese. As someone who's worked in retail over Christmas time, I could definitely relate to that particular story beat. It's then on page 7 that we meet Carol, and it's so beautifully written the way you introduce her. A pair of black leather gloves are tossed onto the desk so that they brush against Therese's arm. She looks up to see a woman who's a vision of cool beauty. Tall, slim, blonde bob, smart black tailored suit, a dash of colour from a green silk scarf. The woman is breathtaking. This is such a special scene, and obviously so pivotal, of course, to what we're about to see. I know it was the real-life sparking point for Patricia's novel, so you did have some basis to go on with this scene, but how did you approach this moment? What were you trying to achieve with it?
Well, those scenes are always the most freeing, liberating scenes to write in this were the early scenes between them, because they're sheer romantic scenes. I mean, yes, they're subtextual, but it's, oh God, look at you. It's love at first sight. It's all those things. And in my mind, I had the picture of Grace Kelly in Rear Window. That was my Carol. Every time I envisioned her, that's what she looked like. So really, it was just a description of her in Rear Window in various ways early on. And it stuck pretty much.
Carol wants a doll for her daughter. She tries to light a cigarette. She's informed that she's not allowed to do that. That then sort of leads to this lovely little moment of laughter, the first of many they'll share together. Shopping makes me nervous, says Carol. That's okay. Working in shops makes me nervous. Is there thematic significance at all to the train set here that Carol ends up ordering? Because dolls are traditionally regarded as girly. Was the train set a case of beginning to thread in some of the subversion here in terms of the desires women are expected to have, the roles they're meant to play?
Oh, yeah.
Or was it just a train set?
No, absolutely. There was that. There was, well, she doesn't play with dolls. This is an unusual 19-year-old, and things that Carol might notice about her that are unusual. So this is one. Also, it's about the itinerant nature, the travel, the trains being quite a romantic, again, mode of transportation, and also a harbinger of doom in a lot of our literature, in these love stories that end badly. So Anna Karenina and all of that. So all of these things were percolating. And, the good thing about films, you can just lay them in. You don't have to explain. And there are people who will get that and people who don't. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. There are multiple levels of reading to any okay film and script. So that was always fine.
Well, speaking of things you don't have to explain, Carol pays and she leaves her gloves. And this is something that, to the best of my knowledge, was not in the novel. So this is something you've added, but you leave it ambiguous, even in the screenplay, as to whether she's done that on purpose or whether it's an accident. And there's been debate among fans as to, what's going on there. And I kind of was wondering about it as I reading the script. And it kind of came to me that there not being a concrete answer to the gloves conundrum is very much in keeping with the feeling of a new romance. So you analyze these micro moments for hidden meaning. It's quite possible that Therese was asking herself the same question. So can you talk to me a little bit about the gloves?
That's always been a fascinating discussion for me to witness or debate among people. People who tend to see Carol as a predator, and there are quite a few in the lesbian community, especially. Oh yeah, she's got it. She's going right. See the gloves as a purposeful gesture, and those who are willing to, entertain a sort of more Freudian or Jungian answer to this. See it as one of those things that happen. I mean, that does happen. People do leave things. It's also possible to be very practical about working it out. Like, she's flustered. This is someone who is, just sort of taken her by surprise without thinking this will ever come to anything. And you leave, you're rushing, it's Christmas. It's quite conceivable that it was an accident. I like to say that it was a purposeful accident. So that too, I think, plays into things that happen in first meetings with people who are, destined to meet again. Whether it happens in a bar and people leave behind something, matchbook with a phone number, or, that is a purposeful thing for sure. But sometimes people don't mean to leave the traces of their desire behind. Just it happens. You have to. I think it's less interesting to see it as a classically predatory move myself. But again, it can be viewed that way.
We then begin to get a look inside Carol's home life. We see her fractured relationship with her husband, Haj, and the sort of performance of sorts that they put on for their daughter, Rindy. And you sprinkle in these references to Abby, who's a friend who is obviously a point of contention for the pair, someone casting a shadow over their relationship. Now, Haj is a really interesting character, because even in this draft, he could have easily been written as a much more abusive, more villainous and controlling antagonist. Instead, his behavior over the course of the film is objectionable, but it still feels human and real. Like, he does terrible things, but from a place of being wounded over the sort of death of the marriage. And the film never descends the way it could have into him being this kind of pantomime villain. So yeah, could you tell me a little bit about how you saw that character and how you approached Haj?
The book, he is way more of a pantomime villain of sorts. But that can work over the course of a novel where you read 50 pages, you put it down, you come back to it. It's not this intense temporal experience of, I'm stuck here for 2 hours with these people, and I keep seeing this guy who is just unbelievably ridiculous. He wears the twirling mustache. But it also doesn't ring true. I mean, Harge wasn't Ted Bundy. I mean, there's bad and then there's human. And taking the example of Chekhov, there are no human behavior is what it is. You understand it in order to create, you empathize with it in order to create full characters. Now, with Harge, there was also something, what I call one of those duh moments. It's like, why would Carol have married someone who was so awful? It didn't make any sense. She's not awful. She's quite, and he's not a physically abusive spouse, which can happen. People can be fooled by quite charming physical abusers. He wasn't that. And so he had to have something that attracted her and held the marriage together, and significantly held it together in the face of Abby, which again is hinted at, but they don't ever directly argue about what it was that happened. And he doesn't move her away. So putting all of those things together, I thought, well, he's a man who it is understandable that he is, first of all, he's divorcing, and that's important before the introduction of Therese. They're getting a divorce, that's on the table. But the introduction of Therese exacerbates the old wounds for him. It reopens things. And that it's a woman that she's gone away with. Would it have been easier if Carol had left him for somebody he worked with, a male colleague? No, but it would have been different. I don't think he would have sent the private detective in quite that way to gather evidence of her moral instability, let's say.
Hey everyone, this is Al, just jumping in to tell you about one of our great sponsors this week. Siren Screams is a new audio horror anthology series from Script Sirens, a collective of female and non-binary scriptwriters based in the West Midlands. All 6 of these eerie audio plays were created remotely during lockdown, in that spooky season between Halloween and Friday, November 13th. And you know what? It shows. Each episode is full of fright and imagination. Give it a go by checking them out on Spotify. Search for Siren Screams. That's SIREN Screams. Okay, back to the conversation. There is a moment in this draft, the next scene, sort of answers that question you posed a minute ago of why would she have married him in the first place? So Carol says, "We were 20, it was rash and silly and sexy and magnificent. And then I grew up. That was my mistake. Rindy came along and she was enough for a long while. Then there's Abby. Thank God for Abby." So you do sort of sprinkle in this draft, sort of hints at what could have happened. But it's interesting reading this first draft or this early draft to see what you've taken out. Is there a power in hinting rather than explicitly stating?
Sometimes, and then sometimes not. I mean, I think there are things probably from a variety of drafts or even from the shooting script that didn't make it in that I think would have helped, not helped the film. The film doesn't need help, but would have made the experience fuller, perhaps, for those who didn't find it emotionally satisfying. I think there is a point at which a withholding becomes a deficit and can be seen as a stylistic tick. I don't think that's true of the film, but, there are certain things that make other things make sense, like the whole sequence of Christmas morning at Carol's. In the shooting script, in other versions, I'm not sure if it was I think it was in the version you read, in some form, where Abby shows up to wish Carol a good trip. But really, it's to see the new girl. And they have it together. And this is all about levels of female attachment, friendship, love, the sort of subtleties of this. You can imagine the same scene happening with men, quite frankly. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine a different sort of scene happening with 3 gay men on Christmas morning, but not that. And not with that, women just stopping short of saying what they mean the whole time, which leads to a lot of unnecessary baggage in the film and in life. Is it necessary to have speeches like the one that you read out? No, it's quite nice speech. It might have been included, but the film didn't need it. So ultimately, there is that. The writer-director, yes, but someone who's a writer, and it's quite odd because I was originally a writer for hire, but I really wasn't a writer for hire on this film. So it's quite interesting to look at the ways in which people fall over themselves trying to say that I was, or that every writer is superfluous. I don't think that's true in this case and some other kind of key cases. Like the year that we were released, there was also Room, which, that's Emma's
Donahue
movie, as much as Lenny Abrahamson's or, anyone else's. Yeah. So it's good that every once in a while a situation like that occurs, a movie that people like or love, to remind them that it's not all just, that it is a collaboration, and it's further a collaboration among lots of people, including your actors. So Cate, who was around, predated Todd's arrival, and who ended up being an executive producer. I mean, it was a passion project for more people than just me or the producers.
So Carol is then told of Haj's bid for sole custody of Rindy under this morality clause, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. How do you describe the way that Carol is being torn in two at this moment? It seems like she's being made to choose between playing happy families and having her daughter ripped away from her.
Which she eventually does all of those things. I mean, in one way or another. She tries the happy families routine after the road trip, of course. But I think quite naturally you would be tempted in that situation just to protect and preserve your child, which, if you think about it, is what she did probably vis-a-vis the Abby situation. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of pre-story to this, in which she is trying out the role of happy family's mother, just mother. And then I think she realizes after she gets back from the road trip that you can't be a good mother to someone at all if you are not living an honest life, whatever that may mean. And I think that moment resonates with a lot of women who grew up with mothers who were unhappy, clearly, who shouldn't have been in their marriages, not because they all had a Therese, but because it wasn't right. And that notion that you must stay together for the children is a particularly damaging one to women. So in all of that scene in the lawyer's office, in which she has to basically say that, was probably the hardest scene to write in the whole script, because it could have been like a TV movie of the week kind of lesson, or a lecture on either side, his or hers. And
but instead it ends with that line that really strikes to the humanity of these characters. If we go to court, it's going to get ugly, and we are not ugly people, Haj.
Is that a little bit of wishful thinking? Probably. Things get ugly with everyone who's going through emotionally difficult situations like this. You do expect some ugliness. And there was, clearly. But at root, They're not those people. And so, it's always someone else who's those people. But I think in this case, they weren't. They're quite decent people, let's say, both of them.
Decent, but they're complicated. They're flawed in some ways. And
yeah,
Carol has to make a decision, and the decision is to sort of leave in the middle of the night almost and abandon Therese just as their relationship is blossoming, and they've just had this like sort of sexual breakthrough in their relationship. It's interesting then, sort of like the two characters, they go their separate ways and they're living out their lives. Therese sort of throws everything into her career and becomes successful. Eventually they have that meeting at the dinner restaurant that we in the finished film open with. But the film itself ends on a note of ambiguity. They meet for a drink, and Carol invites Therese to meet her for dinner later. She says, I'm meeting some friends. I think you'll like them. Initially, Therese turns her down, and then as the film climaxes, she decides to go find her. She barges into this restaurant. The waiter says, do you have a reservation? Therese says, I'm looking for someone. The waiter says, there's a dress code here, which I'm afraid you don't. Therese interrupts. I don't care. I have to find her. Breaks into this room. And then in this draft, she sees Carol, and she sort of like, you describe it as like it's in slow motion, like a dream or a single pure moment of happiness, solid and yet elusive, her reason for living. She moves towards her. Carol raises a wine glass to her lips, and as she does so, she turns slightly to see Therese moving through the room towards her. And it ends instead with Carol holding out a hand, a lifeline as you describe it, to Therese. Therese is almost with her. She holds out her hand to Carol. Their fingertips touch. And then cut to black. In the finished film, it ends in an even more ambiguous way where they lock eyes and you're wondering what the ensuing conversation is going to be. Can you tell me about this ending and why it was you didn't want to wrap a kind of like happily ever after bow on it, but you wanted to sort of hint at some reconciliation of some sorts?
Yeah, well, of course, the book ends exactly in the way that the draft you just quoted does. And I saw no reason. This is, to me, was a perfect ending. In that, it basically reminds us that we live we live moment to moment. We don't live in the future, and we don't live in the past. But for that moment, they are together. And that's how it ends. They are together. You know, whatever else happens tomorrow, that's another day. And we don't go there. The narrative doesn't privilege that. I think in the film, that's still true because of Carol's little smile. I think it's less overtly, it's a less overt emotional release than the other, but it works. I think also the party scene that precedes it, there is a way in which the party was there for two reasons that are now largely they're absent from the film. One was Geneviève, the actress, is, hey, there's a possibility. Here's another future. I mean, not necessarily with her, but you're a sexual being. People find you attractive. It's going to be okay. And the Therese, who's always the watcher, watching everyone else there being happy with someone, which eventually leads her back to the Oak Room. It's like, what am I doing? You know, of course I can't help it. Even though I've told her I'm not going to live with her. And because that's the devastating moment in the scene where they share a drink. It's like, well, okay, I guess you won't live with me, or I guess you won't be interested in that, or whatever she says. And Therese says, no. And you think, oh, that's why she goes to find her. And I think, again, it's instinct, it's visceral, we are drawn to what we're drawn to. And neither the film nor the book lays any great claims for what's going to happen, which is why, I always say, it's better this way. There is no sequel. They'll move in together. Carol is older than Therese. She'll get older, and then she'll be miserable about being older than, the whole thing will happen. Therese will meet other people. It's not going to be easy. And then there's Abby, like Abby is always there on the periphery, waiting. So I think it's perfect that they find each other. That's it. Again, we leave them in that, almost in the state where they first met.
What was the emotion like for you, having battled so long to get this film made, when you finally saw it for the first time?
Oh, God, it's so interesting because I saw a cut of it before, obviously its final form. And watching cuts of films is fascinating because it's like reading drafts of scripts. And you see how things form and how different choices are made, even in performance takes. Again, input from various people. Directors aren't immune to that either. It's about wanting to make something that is not confusing, that's pleasing to people, that's moving, all of those things. And so watching it, it's not like I saw it for the first time in its final form. And having been around people who have seen it just in that form, I know how it hits them. And that happened at Cannes with, people we were watching it with. But I never saw it that way. I mean, I feel like I've never seen it that way because I've just seen it all the way through. And it was just taking things in like, oh, that's interesting. Or that choices. Or maybe that, I don't know about that. And then all of the things that I kind of thought, I don't know about that, eventually found their way outside of the film. So, there was a sync of some sort. We all were in the same bubble psychically. But to see it first time, I've never just been hit by it in that way. I guess it's impossible once you've been involved with it for so long and you think, I guess that's good. But of course, it's useful to watch it in the company of people who haven't seen 4 cuts of it or whatever, or haven't written so many, little versions of it that you feel like I never want to see this again. It's an interesting reaction you have when you're on the inside of something.
And just finally, Phyllis, is there a legacy that you hope for with Carol? Do you hope that it teaches Hollywood, for example, something about the sort of like possibilities of different types of love stories?
Yeah, I'm not sure you teach Hollywood anything ever. It's sort of a fool's game, isn't it? To wish that. And actually in the 4 or 5 years since then, it hasn't moved the needle. What you see is a lot of gay male narratives being lauded as moving the needle. Here's the legacy that I think is interesting. There have been a number of films, I won't name them, who have obviously been quite inspired by, who probably were made possible by Carol, about lesbians, largely period pieces as well, which is odd. I would like, and that those films are thriving is good. Some of them are made by men, which what I want is for women to be able to tell these stories and to have a contemporary version of, well, not of Carol, because I don't think the same narrative can necessarily exist. But I think that there's a broad range of narratives that would present lesbians as something other than exotics or people just interested in sex. I mean, there's a whole bunch of movies like Bound and that have presented, hotties or, but they're quite bad. They're bad girls. There's that trope. Like normal girls, normal women who aren't one thing or another. People living in the suburbs, mean, we've had little glimpses of characters like that. But I would hope that one day Carol and films like it will open up that discussion, and the film about women won't be seen as an adjunct to films about men or patriarchy. And will that happen in my lifetime? I have no idea. I think the world has so many things to worry about that's probably low on everybody's list. But it would help.
It certainly would. Well, Phyllis, this has been absolutely fascinating. And I can't tell you how much I love this film. Thank you so much for your time today and for coming on Script Apart.
Sure, my pleasure.
I really do appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Kamel Demek, with music from Stefan Bindley-Taylor. Get in touch. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, or you can email us, thescriptapartpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.